Hello listeners, this week's episode follows Simon. For those new to our work here, I would suggest going back to season 1 to get a feel for who Simon is and how he works himself into the stories we find. This will give you the information we have here more context. And as a reminder to those who are all caught up, Simon is a key player in the story of the Otiv. He manipulates reality with his will and superior intellect. He follows Lilith's initiatives and has even procured other actors for what I am calling the cause. The last we heard from him, he had just found a being called the Boy, and there was something off about him. We will find out more this week, but I fear this episode will leave you with more questions than answered. But before we begin, I would like to thank our newest interdimensional traveler, Jake, for joining our Patreon. Your contribution to our work is invaluable, and we appreciate your support and your suggestions. If anyone else would like to explore stories outside of this podcast here, go to Patreon and search for the Nightmare Trials podcast. Also, you can find a link in our show notes. From there, you can sign up to be an interdimensional traveler and receive bonus episodes, be a part of discussion groups, and receive a shout out on the main storyline. The cost is only $2 per month, and you'll be helping this podcast tremendously. Now, let's listen to this week's episode, Simon. So strap in tight. The trials are about to begin. Hello, listeners. My name is Professor Adontes Finch, and welcome to the Nightmare Trials.
Simon, Lilith's agent of the Otiv, walks through the mist, this time with no purpose, no direction, and no means to an end. This place was his solitude and his means of discovery, and it had been this way for longer than he could even remember. But he did remember when he heard her voice calling for him. It was the siren's song, sweet and angelic, pulling him to her. And after countless lifetimes of hopping from realm to realm, he found her door, the entryway in which she resided, and called for him by name. The mahogany wood polished to a high sheen, and a peculiar symbol etched across the top. And when he opened her door, he finally felt like he was home again. And he found that what he had been fighting for so desperately in the beginning was nothing more than programmed indoctrination. He found that the horrors within reality are necessary, and she had shown him that fixing lives for prosperity was pointless. Every reality that he spent time fixing had fallen back into disrepair. Some even fell from existence, being consumed by the black and white flame. His once vitriolic hero complex was now a thing of the past, and his only goal was to appease Lilith and make her dream a reality. A scream echoed all around him, and Simon stopped in place, the mist wisping like fingers across his face. He thought to himself,
Where did that come from? It felt right here, but also so far away.
Another scream erupted around him. Simon's head began to pivot and shake as he worked to locate the direction of the noise.
Who is in here with me?
He thought.
Who has broken through to my side? While it's not impossible to happen, it is highly unlikely. I will need to put a stop to their meddling in matters they could not understand.
Simon shut his eyes and began to focus. His body began to vibrate and pulse, sending out ripples through the mist. Almost instantly, information started to flow back to him from all directions. Doors upon doors and their placement in space and time. The mist connecting them all. Then came the anomaly. Like a red rose in the middle of white tulips, it stood out. But it wasn't a door, it was a figure.
This wasn't Earl or Lilith. It wasn't even one of the three. They were nestled away in their own realities. Aubrey growing her powers, and Mr. Fields and the boy were together. So who was this?
Simon, now locating the intruder, focused his energy on their location. More and more details flowed back to him. A feminine build and a body of marble. Eyes darker than the depths of the ocean, and more teeth than what could fit into the creature's mouth. Another scream assailed his ears. And in a blink, Simon came to her location.
How did you find your way here?
The creature in front of him stood hunched, breathing deeply, and her hair greasy, black, and wild hair hung in front of her face.
I know you can hear me, so I will ask again. How did you find your way here?
A guttural snarl echoed deep from within the woman's chest. Flaps on the side of her neck opened like fish gills, expelling hot air and phlegm. Realization hit Simon. He knew who she was, and she shouldn't have been able to make her way here.
It seems as if Leo and Riker didn't do their job at containing you within their charge. And with you being here, I can only assume that you have destroyed your entire reality. And now you're lost, roaming without purpose.
The creature just stared at him, unmoving.
Let's see if we can find you a new reality to torture. But watch your greed. To kill only for the sake of killing will only bring you to your demise early. Now, give me your hand.
Simon extended his hand towards the figure. Again, though, it didn't move. Irritation and anger began to swell up inside him, two emotions that he worked hard to never feel.
Listen to me. You cannot exist on this plane without my help. And right now I have too many things going on, nor the patience to babysit you. So again, give me your hand.
The creature swung her head back and let out another scream. Simon's upper lip began to quiver in disgust, and that all too familiar feeling of hunger began to fill his body. The creature wasn't going to follow him, and he wasn't going to allow for it to expire within his plane of existence. It needed death to latch on to for its survival. And once the creature latched on, it was nothing more than a wild animal. With its reality now gone, it wouldn't be long before the smell of death would permeate and foul the mist, spreading like a disease and infecting everything it touched. He would not allow for that.
Fine. If you refuse to listen to me, then I have no other choice.
Simon's eyes rolled to the back of his head, and his mouth began to elongate. His teeth extended into needle-like 3-inch fangs. In one quick movement, he lunged at the creature, wrapping it tightly within his arms in a bear hug. It began to fight and scream. Simon began to laugh. There was nothing this monster could do. Even if Simon gave the appearance of calm and collected, what lay within him was nothing more than a monster. A monster with needs and a hunger that he had suppressed through eons. But when the opportunity arose, he would not pass up a meal. He lunged his head at the creature, digging his fangs deep into its neck, biting down hard and ripping the gills from its body. Black, brackish blood began to bubble and spill from the wound as the creature's body began to weaken. Simon chewed on the meat. It reminded him of fish in a thick oyster sauce. He swallowed and went in for another bite, and then another. When he had consumed the creature, he fell to the ground and laid on his back, the mist swirling in and around him. He felt satiated, which was something he hadn't felt for some time now. He closed his eyes and breathed in deep as he felt his body begin to digest the creature. It disgusted him that eating made him feel this way. The loss of control, the euphoria, and then the heaviness that would linger far too long. He used to always enjoy eating before he became what he was. It was science and art all packaged into an item made for consumption. But now he didn't need to eat to survive, and the need for sustenance withered away years ago. So he only ate when the opportunity presented itself. And even then, he didn't allow for the blissful feeling to take control of his mind. He wouldn't be any better than Earl if he did. So now he lay there, waiting for the meal to digest all the way, so he could begin to wander once more. He closed his eyes and focused. Something had been nagging at him ever since he found the boy. How did this child destroy an entire reality? And why was he the key that held that universe together? Simon searched through his mind, as if it was a Rolodex of all time and space. Then it happened. He honed in on a story from a reality that stood tangentially to the boy's. He let his mind go blank, and like a demon possessing its victim, he slipped into a man's body, listening as he recounted his story.
Listen, I don't know how to describe it, but it felt more real than any dream I have ever had. The dream started slow, almost quiet. I was standing in this town. It was familiar, but everything just seemed off. You know that feeling when something is just wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it? The town I was in was full of people, but it felt empty. Forgotten, like a place that had been abandoned by time itself. I started walking through the town, watching people go about their lives, but there was this undercurrent of fear, like they all knew something was coming but couldn't stop it. And then I came upon this boy. He was standing in front of me in the middle of the town square. There was a large water fountain behind him, and it was adorned with sculptures of people in pain and suffering. And I swear to you, some of those figures carved into the stone moved, like their eyes followed me and their hands reached towards me. It was the most unnerving thing I had ever seen. But back to this boy. He looked small, frail even, but there was something else, something, I don't know, primal about him. Like a predator, just waiting for the right moment to strike. And he just stood there, in a bright yellow rain jacket. And his presence was suffocating, like the air itself bent around him. And what scared me the most is that he didn't have a face. It was just smooth, pale skin where his features should have been. I swear to fucking God, it was the most terrifying thing, but like in this subtle way, like my mind couldn't fully comprehend what I was seeing. I remember trying to look away, but I couldn't. I was just so mesmerized by what was going on. It was like he was pulling me in almost, demanding that I notice him without saying a single fucking word. And I kept thinking to myself, he's just a child, like, isn't he? He's just a child. But deep down, I knew he wasn't. There was a wrongness inside of him, a darkness, if you will, and it went far beyond anything human. And then I started to see shadows move out of the corner of my eye. Like someone was there, but when I glanced their way, they were just gone. And I felt like I was being watched to see what my next move would be. But I couldn't even understand why I was there in the first place. So what the hell were they expecting? Anyways, these visions started to flash through my mind, coming seemingly out of nowhere. Then I began to notice that the small animals around the town started to disappear. I don't know how I knew they were gone, but I just felt it happen. Like this wave of loss just hit me. In one moment they were there, and the next, gone. But then I did notice that parts of them were still there. I inspected the ground around me, only to see twitching limbs of squirrels flailing on the ground. The insides of some animal lay inert, sizzling in the sun. The more I looked, the more I began to notice, and the more I began to see those black shadows watching me, disappearing into the landscape just as I began to see them. But that's not even the craziest part. What really unnerved me was that none of the people around me said a word about it. Like torn up animals on the ground was just fucking normal. Or I guess like they were just too afraid to acknowledge it. Another wave hit me and I closed my eyes. It felt like shards of glass were cutting through my skin, digging themselves deep into my flesh, ripping me apart inch by inch. Nausea and dizziness swelled within me. I began to take deep breaths, trying to maintain my composure until this feeling left me. Unfortunately, it did. I felt my body begin to recover, and my eyes opened. And I wish they would have stayed shut, because in front of me was a small child's arm, its fingers twitching and curling in an erratic manner. Blood seeped from a wound just under the elbow, and I watched as the color in the arm went from fleshy pink to a pallid white. But even as the last drop of blood drained from the appendage, the fingers still moved. The arm now beginning to flail around on the ground like a fish out of water. And the slapping noises it was making on the concrete made me bring my hand to my mouth in shock. The sound echoed and reverberated within my mind, and I began to notice that it was getting louder. Another shadow caught my attention, and I jerked my head in its direction, trying to steal a glance before it disappeared again. And again, I wish I would have just never looked, because in front of me was a pathway filled with the moving and dismembered body parts of children. Whatever was happening in this dream, I wanted no more of it. I went to run, but my feet felt like they were encased in cement. I was stuck there, and I could only think as the reason to why was because I had to witness what was happening. I had to be the one to see the horror that lay there, and I was meant to do something with this information. But what the fuck do I do with it? I wasn't sure at the time, and I'm not even sure I know now. And that boy, he was always there, just standing, watching, faceless and silent. I looked to him, seeing the wisping shadows flickering in and out around him, and his presence seemed to grow heavier, like a storm building in the distance. I could feel the tension in the air, like something inside him was about to snap. And then his head tilted up towards the sky, and the world seemed to freeze. Everything and everyone holding its breath. and even those damn shadow figures stopped, frozen as if they were between space and time itself. Their charred bodies seemed inhuman, and their eyes were ever watching. And the world around me was silent and still. No wind, no insect noises. Not even the sound of my own heartbeat could be heard. The boy then raised his hands up towards the sky as black lightning struck the ground around him, splitting the earth itself and dissolving the ground underneath of him. Lightless smoke-filled tendrils started to creep up and around him, moving slowly at first, as if probing the air, searching for something to latch onto. Then all at once they picked up speed, honing in on something as if they were alive. They moved so goddamn fast, slithering through the streets like a serpent, wrapping around buildings, people, and just everything. And they tore it all apart. And the sound was, I can't even describe it. Flesh ripping, bones cracking, this wet, horrible tearing sound that echoed through my living nightmare. But the boy, he and I were spared from the destruction. Looking at him then, it was clear to me that he had a power. A sadistic and twisted power. His body started moving in these jerky, unnatural ways. His hands became claws, long and sharp, and his once blank face began to shift. I can't fucking explain it, but it was like he wore no expression and every expression all at once. I know that sounds insane, but that is what it was. Then the smoke tendrils that were destroying the reality around me began to converge on him, pushing into his body, and he consumed the world around him. The people, the animals, the dirt, and even the fucking sky. I could hear laughter, raspy and weak. The cackles were numerous, and I began to notice those who were watching this nightmare with me were the ones making the noise. A chant broke out in a language I couldn't even begin to understand. But the meaning was clear. They wanted this. They asked for it, and they needed it. Everything began to warp after that. The sky turned black, blacker than anything I have ever seen. The stars themselves disappeared, like someone had snuffed them out. And within the boy's chest, there was a swirling mass of darkness, pulling in the light around him. I felt my extremities begin to stretch, my fingers elongated, my skin beginning to tear from my body, my bones turning to taffy, all pulling towards that void within him. I felt all of it. That memory keeps me up at night. As my body accelerated towards him, time slowed down around me. Seconds turned into eternities. And then I passed through the black mass, and everything around me just collapsed. I floated in a lightless void. It was like reality itself had just unraveled, like it couldn't hold together under the weight of whatever this boy was. Then I was given a glimpse outside of my new confines, and I saw the boy, standing alone, his face changing every second. And I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, trapped within this nightmare, staring at him as he just stood there, silent. A door appeared before him, and the boy turned towards it. He took off his raincoat and stepped inside, slamming the door shut behind him. And my sight outside of this new hell I was in faded. Then hot white and black flame erupted all around me. I felt my skin begin to melt away. The hair on my head caught fire. I screamed as my eyeballs exploded within my head, and darkness took hold of me, and I heard the fire quickly approaching. Luckily, I woke up after that. my body covered in sweat and my pulse hitting hard. I'm not sure what the dream meant. I'm not sure who that boy was. But I fear that the dream I had was a warning. A warning that all things will come to an end. And it is that boy who will bring existence to its knees.
Simon's eyes shot open.
Why did Lilith want this one? He was a threat to all of existence. And even more, he was a threat to Mr. Fields, who is now in the boy's charge until the time is right.
Simon rose to his feet and wiped the dried blood from his meal off his face. He had never questioned Lilith's motives, but as he began his walk through the mist once again, feelings of doubt started to fill his mind.
Thank you for listening and supporting this podcast. If you would like access to the interdimensional radio station, you can search for the Nightmare Trials on Patreon. Once there, it is only $2 per month to gain access to our extra short stories and chat discussion with the professor. Your contribution helps us continue to do what we do. Further, you can go to the nightmaretrials.square.site and order merch and suggest to be a part of one of our stories. We would love nothing more than to add your name to our writings. Lastly, make sure to follow the podcast and hit the notification button so you never miss an episode. Until we meet again,